Tonight on Closer Look, there's some mystery surrounding a boat that remains aground at Hanlan's Point Beach since at least late November. Toronto Today reporter Gabe Oatley has been following this story and joins us tonight from Toronto. Gabe, it's been a month, in fact, exactly a month today, since this large boat has been marooned on Hanlan's Point Beach on the Toronto Islands. What do we know about the boat, its owner, and more importantly, what happened?
Yeah, sure thing, Scott. So we know that this is a boat that was registered in Nova Scotia. The boat isn't new. It's a 35-foot converted lobster fishing boat. I spoke to an expert who said, you can tell it's a converted lobster fishing boat by the windows that are in. There are three windows in the side of the cabin that wouldn't have been there originally. This boat washed up on Hanlan's Point Beach on the Toronto Islands in at least late November. So a kayaker who was paddling around the island spotted it, I believe, on November 26th. So we know it's been there since at least then. What we know is that the boat washed up on the beach after the engine conked out one day. So the boat lost power, it washed up on the shore, and then a big storm came and the boat got pushed further up onto the beach where it stayed, since that time. We do not know who the owner is. The Canadian Coast Guard told us earlier this week that when the boat got beached, the owner called it in to the Coast Guard as they are supposed to, but for privacy reasons, the CCG would not reveal the identity of the owner to us.
All right, so what about the police marine unit's investigation? Have they provided any insights on whether the boat's current state poses a safety or even a legal issue?
Yeah, so the police went out to the boat on Wednesday along with the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has since said that they, when they were out there, removed bulk amounts of oil and gas from the vessel. This helps to minimize the potential environmental impact of having the boat, beached on the shore. They said, however, that doesn't mean that all environmental risks are sort of gone. They placed a notice on the boat saying that the owner of the boat now has until next Wednesday, that's January 15th, to move the boat. If they don't, they could face fines from the Canadian Coast Guard. The maximum penalty in Canada for abandoning a boat is about $25,000. Though we did a check of a public database where the CCG by law has to list all of the fines that they sort of levy on boat owners who abandon their boats. And it appears as though, despite the fact that abandoned boats are becoming more common, the CCG is not leveling a lot of fines. In 2024, they levied just 4. We asked the Canadian Coast Guard about that, and they said that they don't often need to fine folks because in the vast majority of cases, owners comply with the Coast Guard's request to move the boat.
Gabe, are there any indications that there just might be someone living on board the boat? I know there's been a satellite router and chip bags discovered.
Yeah, totally. So, it was really interesting. We visited the site on Tuesday. We went, took the ferry over to the Toronto Islands. I took my bike out to Hanlan's Point Beach. And frankly, Scott, it was a bit spooky. That beach in the summer is a vibrant queer space. It's one of the oldest queer beaches. Certainly in Canada, perhaps worldwide, folks all over the beach, often nude is sort of the vibe in the summer. No such scene on Tuesday when we were out there. The sand was hard, the wind was racing, nobody around. I walked up to the boat, kind of gave a holler. I knocked on the cabin door. I tried sort of gently to jimmy the door to see if I could, peek inside. The door did not move. Nobody answered. However, I did see some chip bags inside, which suggested to me, maybe somebody was in there. I also took a bunch of pictures, and when I was back at my desk, I sent them to Andy Cardiff. He's the CEO of a company called Ceto, which commonly moves abandoned boats that have been sort of left there by their owners. It was Andy actually who spotted the Starlink satellite router on the roof of the boat, which he said suggested to him that somebody may indeed, still be living there. We connected with the Toronto Police Marine Service yesterday, and they said that while there is evidence indeed that somebody may have been living there, they said they now know that the owner is not living there anymore and has found shelter off the island.
So we know there's a rising number of abandoned boats. That's been cited by many experts. Do you think this is reflective of broader economic or housing issues? We know the new stats released by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario just yesterday. Could this trend be tied to people using old boats as a last resort for housing?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's certainly what sort of popped to my mind as I've been exploring this. There's no doubt the rising cost of housing is forcing thousands of people onto the street. That report you mentioned from yesterday from AMO found that in 2024, more than 80,000 Ontarians found themselves homeless. That's a 25% increase from 2022 numbers. It's really staggering stuff, frankly. Andy Cardiff, CEO of CETO, he said that they've increasingly seen such cases of folks sort of parking their boats where they shouldn't be and living there. He put it pretty bluntly. It was like, if the choice is between living on the street or living in your boat, most people are going to choose to live in the boat. However, I think it's important that we be careful not to necessarily assume that's certainly what's happening here. A Starlink satellite modem isn't a free item, like that's a pretty pricey thing to buy. The monthly cost to maintain that is not nothing. So I think we should be careful to assume that this person is, destitute or something like that. Also, Andy said, some people do just choose to live on their boat because they like it. They like the water, they like the flexibility of it. And so it could be a case of that too. And of course, finally, we don't know how long somebody was living there. Maybe they were there for a day or two. Maybe they were there for a month. We don't know.
But what we do know, Gabe, is that boat has been there for at least a month. So why the delay in acting to do something about the vessel? I know City Council implemented some measures back in 2022. What specific challenges are preventing quicker action on cases like this one?
Yeah, so the city passed a couple of motions in 2022, as you mentioned there, around the challenge of abandoned boats. The motions, I would say, were pretty broad. So in one of them, for instance, council asked the city manager to, quote, assess the feasibility of entering into discussions with the federal government to ask for more power to deal with abandoned vessels. So right now it's up to Transport Canada and the Canadian Coast Guard to deal with abandoned boats. Sometimes it takes those two organizations a heck of a long time. And so the city was sort of in 2022 looking into asking the federal government for more power such that they could do something about it if, those two other bodies were not, addressing issues in a timely way. And what prompted the city to sort of look into that, there were two cases of abandoned boats in Toronto that had sort of like sat on the waterfront for a long time. And so city council was wanting to do something about it. We asked the city about the status of that motion, but we haven't yet heard back. But I guess I'll just say, since we published this story, we have heard from a couple of other folks that there are other abandoned boats on the waterfront. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not this story continues to develop, whether or not there are more cases of boat owners sort of ditching their boats or living in their boats in spots where they're not allowed to be. And second, what happens with this one particular boat on Hanlan's Island, whether or not the owner does indeed move it by next Wednesday or whether or not it falls to the Canadian Coast Guard or Transport Canada to intervene.
All right, can't wait for the update. It's a fascinating story. Toronto Today reporter Gabe Oatley on tonight's Closer Look.